Hi, everyone. It's Jonny Enoch, and today I want to share with you my thoughts on a bullshit conspiracy that the Queen of England was a shape-shifting reptile alien, and that the other members of the royal family are actually reptilians living in disguise. And this conspiracy has had all sorts of incredibly strange and bizarre theories surrounding it, that they do sacrifices and blood drinking and all this other kind of nonsense. Or as they say in the UK, it's absolute and utter bollocks. So where we also see this deviating recently since the passing of Her Majesty is that online, I've seen all these so-called channelers that are in touch with the Ashtar Command and all kinds of various 10th dimensional space beings say that now that the head reptilian on the planet has stepped down, we've shifted into a 5D or 6D timeline, and all these other reptilian overlords have stepped in, and all this other incredibly interesting stuff that I'm sure that their followers enjoy hearing. I have just had enough of this conspiracy, because I will say that conspiracies are real. We know that there are many that have been proven real over time, such as Project Paperclip. We know that there have been all kinds of cases throughout our histories when things have been covered up. In fact, I believe extraterrestrials are real. And we have a lot of very legitimate and interesting cases to explore in that. And I'm not discounting the fact that there couldn't be beings that look like reptiles out in our universe, to have a humanoid form. But if you want to go to the bottom of this conspiracy, it starts with David Icke. And so, David Icke, if you're listening, I think you are a very intelligent man. You have gotten a lot of things right in the past, but I am going to give you guys a bit of history about this. If we go back to the beginning of when David Icke started his path of research, he also was coming out as being a sportscaster. He said some very controversial things on the news. He had a great awakening, but he was brought out to America and met Jordan Maxwell at the time of when he was involved with something called the Truth Seeker Company. And if you guys want to hear the full story about this, go on Forbidden Knowledge TV, which is Billy Carson's network. And I just did a series on the Odyssey of Enoch with Paul Tice, who worked with Jordan Maxwell, who was around all of this at that time. And the whole story is revealed on there. Jordan Maxwell shared a lot of his research with David Icke at the time. David Icke learned about some cases about reptile aliens and people who had encountered them and all that stuff. And this got him started looking in this area. Two of them had their differences. They didn't talk for a while. Years later, there was a private meeting called that no one knew about until recently. I wasn't even supposed to talk about this until Jordan Maxwell passed away. And we showed the pictures of this and how it happened. The Princess of Abu Dhabi called a meeting up in Switzerland near Liechtenstein, and she sectioned off a whole private hotel. Jordan Maxwell was brought up there along with David Icke, Klaus Dana, and many others. And they all had this amazing meeting with the princess for about a month. Everyone was going out in the balcony at night, drinking wine, doing whatever they want. And the princess wanted to know everything. After the meeting was done, she said to each of them, I will fly you to anywhere you want to go in the world, and I will take care of the expenses. Here's 10 grand, go do what you want. So David Icke, he chose to go meet this Zulu shaman, and his name was Credo Mutha. And he revealed this great reptilian mythology on Earth that had been there. And this really piqued David Icke's interest and really threw gas on the fire. Now, as a researcher, you hear all sorts of incredible stories from people with wild imaginations. You look at our ancient past and you see symbolism of emperors and others who have had dragons and serpentine kings. And we know the serpent has always represented great energy or kundalini and all sorts of things on this planet. Even Melusine, who you see on the side of your Starbucks cup, the great siren, that she's also been Pisces in the ancient world. She's the serpentine mother of the European royal families. So it's easy for a person that has a wild imagination for it to run wild. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there who are not going to agree with what I have to say, but I come from a British heritage. My dad has always taught us the importance of British history. My grandfather was the best and most well-versed person I've ever encountered that knew about British history going back into 1066 with Harold. He could tell you about the King Henry VIII and the Tudor dynasty, moving forward into Charles I and Cromwell with the parliamentarians, Charles II, going forward into the Georgian period with the Georgian kings. He knew all about Shakespeare, Churchill, and all these people. So, of course, I love British tradition. And the British Empire was the last great empire on earth. And although people have their criticisms of every empire on earth, going back into the Egyptians, you can have problems with the Romans, the Greeks, talk about the Spanish, when you talked about Cortez and all these sort of things. But the British Empire brought all kinds of civilization everywhere on this planet. In fact, this is why we speak English today and why countries got railroads, they got education and infrastructure. The Queen was also the head of the Commonwealth countries. And I want to say for her, I have a tremendous respect for her, being born into this family, what she encountered. In fact, a very close friend of mine was involved with the Royal Protection Division of the Metropolitan Police in the UK. It was actually at the Queen's door, protecting her around the clock for 12 years. So he saw everything. So I want to answer some questions for all of you about what she was really like. First of all, I asked him, did you ever see her turn into a reptilian? He said, absolutely not. But one thing she was not a stupid person. She was not ignorant. She was very highly intelligent. She was aware of everything in the room at all times. I do believe that the royal family comes from a very special and important lineage. It goes back to the ancient world when you want to talk about bloodlines and what they've inherited. And there's a reason they're in the position that they are in with the different properties that they own and the various royal houses and what they have to go through. But at no time did he ever see them involved in any nefarious activities. And I want to answer some questions about that. The one thing that is certain about her is that she was very traditional and old-fashioned in her views. For example, she knew how to fix Land Rovers. And there is this story about one time when her Land Rover broke down at the Balmoral Castle, and she fixed it herself because she learned how to do this in World War II. She was not afraid to get her hands dirty. She was very down to earth. As a young girl, she was initiated into Druidry. She was a Druidess, and she was highly spiritual. And I believe she believed in the forces of good. She believed in prayer. Every Sunday at Windsor Castle, where she lived, she wasn't attending the big, illustrious St. George's Chapel, going in there. She liked to drive her Range Rover into the back of the Royal Park. And I've been to all these places with our friend, Juji and I have been there. We've been to the back of a very intimate tour that people don't get to see, and all these areas. She went to a little chapel, and actually another friend of mine, who I'm very close to, as growing up, he was playing the organ in this little chapel where the Queen would attend every Sunday. At one time, the King of Saudi Arabia came to visit, and she went to go pick him up in her Land Rover. She also had Range Rovers, but those are harder to fix. And he didn't want to get in at first because he didn't think women should be able to drive. But she said, get in. And she drove so fast, it made him very nervous. She also really enjoyed the simple things in life. When you visit Windsor Castle, you notice all these incredible rooms and areas of it that are really opulent and magnificent, but she lived in a very simple apartment to herself that was really old-fashioned. Even her TV was like an old one of those old wooden boxes for the longest time. She didn't want to upgrade it. She had a lot of charitable causes that nobody knew about. And the same can be said of Prince Philip. The guy had an absolutely amazing sense of humor. He was a naval gentleman. He also was involved in all kinds of different causes behind the scenes that he contributed his funds to with his private equity. And that includes the Flying Saucer Review that was founded by Gordon Crichton in the 1950s. And currently, my friend in England, Harry Challenger, is the editor and publisher of that magazine. And I happen to know that the royal family reads it and had absolute fascination in all of these subjects. And they were very supportive of it. Now, no family is perfect. So a lot of people have criticisms out there, and I understand why friends of mine in Southern Ireland, they would have issues traditionally with what's gone on historically. But again, when we look at these things in the past, history is not perfect. Other criticisms that David Icke has brought up of the royal family is he pointed out Jimmy Savile. And Jimmy Savile, if you saw that very disturbing and troubling documentary about him, he was saying, now then, now then, now then, and Jim will fix it and all this kind of stuff. He was a notorious person that happened to con everyone. It doesn't matter if it was the Beatles, if it was Elvis Presley, if it was Margaret Thatcher. All these people liked him because he was a charismatic individual that showed himself to the public to be this great philanthropist, this great charity lover that was supposed to be good with children. He was a DJ, he was an entertainer. And at the time, Prince Charles and Diana were looking to bolster their public opinion. And so they wrote this guy at the time and they said, would you help us to be more charitable, and tried to contact him for a short while in order to help their image at the time. Now, with that, they distanced themselves after a while, as a lot of people did. They didn't know what he was getting up to. And David Icke has said, well, there is a very special policing force that is around the royal family that would have known everything about him. And actually, that is not true, because when I've talked to my friends that are involved in that division, what they have said that if a friend of the royal family is invited in with a special invitation, they don't look into who that person is, not unless there's a very serious incident. The only time they look into a person's background and look into everything about them is if there is a foreign visitor or somebody who doesn't have an official invitation. Okay, so that's thing number one. Thing number two, people like to point out the Diana scandal. The Diana scandal, I don't believe had anything to do with the royal family. I think more of this is an international issue, the Fayed family and what had happened there. It's a very sad and misfortunate accident, what had taken place there. But again, that's another incident that's completely separate. And then there's all kinds of scandals that people bring up where they try to say the Queen visited Canada and people went missing. Well, there has been no conclusive evidence of that. And it's very sad what took place in Canada with the various residential schools. But I think that lumping the Queen and the royal family into that is also awful. And I don't think she deserves it. And lastly, when people talk about Prince Andrew getting involved in this Epstein case, it's very unfortunate, because every family has someone who's made a bad decision, who has gotten involved with a scandal, and it's very difficult to deal with on all accounts. But Epstein lured in all kinds of people around the world. I believe that was a very clever, either intelligence operation, or it was something to compromise people at a very high level, whether it was people from Silicon Valley, people that were intellectuals, into tech, influencers. It was a very large scale operation, and it's appalling. It is a horrible thing, but I do think that the Queen was absolutely saddened by that. She was horrified. And of course, she did everything she could to distance from that situation. And because of all these controversies, people say, well, what do we need a monarch for anyways in these modern times? And why are we spending all these taxpayer funds on the upkeep of their properties, their protection, their security? And I will tell you right now that the British royal family brings a lot more money into the UK through tourism of people coming to places like Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace than anything else. And if you don't like the fact that there is British tradition, that you have a sovereign at the head of your state, the fact that you still have a government and politicians that actually make the decisions, but this is part of British tradition. If you don't like that, well, then just leave the UK. As we move towards a global society, a lot of people these days are indoctrinated to hate the past. They want to capitulate and get rid of our old traditions to move towards one that is unified around the world. And I understand that also, and that's part of the agenda. But also, I want to say that we shouldn't get rid of our traditions. We should also respect our history. Zuzana and I, we have a great love for British history. And in fact, she absolutely loves looking at everything there is on Anne Boleyn. And she's even behind me, you'll see there's a whole section of Anne Boleyn books and looking up the Tudor dynasty of who Henry VIII was. And we visited all around Hampton Court and those various places. And without history, Life is a mystery. So I say, let's not throw away everything in the past. Let's not give into these conspiracies. The truth about the world is far stranger than anything you may have heard. I will say lastly that all these people you think are in charge of the world today, whether it's all those wealthy banking families, the folks in Lincolnshire, all those ones that you'll point the finger at, certain oligarchs and bankers, and those are rich moguls. Those people are not who are truly running the world. Who do you think gave the Kennedys all their money to go out there and acquire all these spirits and places that they were getting whiskeys and the various distilleries? When you trace back the money and what you see will go back a long ways. In fact, the folks that you think are the very wealthy people in the world, they're quite boring. They're over in Monaco. They're on their yachts. They are going to fancy fundraisers and buying art. They're sipping fine champagnes and single malt scotches and trading things, but they aren't really truly the ones that are in power. The ones that are in power, they're really involved behind the world scenes. You will never know who they are. In fact, I was told they're walking among you in blue jeans, maybe ripped blue jeans, buying a hot dog outside, and they'll have more money than you could even imagine, more influence. So that's my rant for today for Enoch's Thoughts. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends, and I'll talk to you all soon.